Moonshine Jesus, won't you shine a light?
Hello and welcome to the Moonshine Jesus Show, brought to you by ProgressiveChristianity.org, a wonderful place for all your progressive Christian needs, including articles and resources, a wonderful place to go check out. Hope that you will follow ProgressiveChristianity.org on social media and the Moonshine Jesus Show on social media, or listen wherever you get your podcasts. Today we are talking about Loki, and we have to tell you at the beginning of every episode that we do spoil it for you. This is a spoiler-filled zone, but there's only one episode of season 2 of Loki, so we can't spoil it too much. I am joined, as always, by the one and only Mark Samlin. How are you today, Mark?
I am doing great, and I'm sure the world is happy that I am the one and only.
I don't know. I think we could use a few more Mark Samlins out there.
Maybe a few more Caleb's. I don't know about more Mark.
No, I think they're probably glad that they only have one of both of us.
That might be true. That might be very true.
And when we get together, we cause all kinds of problems, which is fun. We have a great time doing it, and 100%. We have a great time geeking out about all kinds of stuff, like we're going to about Loki. But before we can, we have to get our drinks ready. Do you have a drink ready today, Mark?
I do. I went with a Loki-themed drink. One of Loki's taglines is he says, "I am burdened with glorious purpose." So I am having a bourboned with glorious purpose. I made a simple syrup with honey, dried rosemary, and a white pepper. And then I combined that equal parts with fat, green chartreuse, and bourbon. And I accented it with a little fresh rosemary out of our garden over in the side of the yard. So I'm having a bourbon with glorious purpose. Oh, there's also some glitter, some edible glitter in there to give the glorious purpose to it. So,
that's right.
How about you? Yes. What are you going with?
So I also saw that tagline, bourbon with glorious purpose, and I liked that. But
it's a brilliant line.
And so I decided to make a version of that myself, but that looks very involved.
It was.
The prep time said it was an hour and 10 minutes.
Oh, it took 10 minutes. It took
10 minutes. Okay, well, mine took 2. So my bourbon with glorious purpose just has a couple ounces of bourbon, has some lemon juice and some honey syrup that I made. It doesn't have any. Delicious. It doesn't have any glitter, but it's still got that glow, that gold glow, the glorious.
You gotta love that nice gold Loki glow. So you got the gold and the green. It's beautiful, man.
I love that.
Going straight on Loki.
Cheers.
Cheers to you, man. I am so looking forward to this.
Me too.
Moonshine Jesus, Moonshine Jesus, Moonshine Jesus, Moonshine Jesus, won't you shine a light?
Hello and welcome back to the Moonshine Jesus Show. You've joined us for our Geek Out segment where Caleb and I take a little bit of time and just let our geek flags fly and have a lot of fun talking about the show. We won't spend the majority of our time doing this. We want to move on to our theopolitical and put more time there, but we are going to enjoy it just a bit. So for those who don't know, Loki season 2 has started. Episode 1 has dropped. It started with a bang and quite a bit of I would say, intrigue. For those who aren't following, I'm going to catch you up sort of quickly. Loki has contracted some sort of, we call it timey-wimey Marvel ailment, in which he seemingly randomly spaghettifies back and forth along the TVA or the Time Variance Authority's timeline. And with the help of Morbius and Ouroboros, who's already a new fan favorite in the show, he seeks out a way to put an end to his pain-inducing time jumping. all the while, our motley-ish crew team of meddling do-gooders struggle with what to do about the ever-increasing variant timelines that were created when they killed He Who Remains. And all the while, they're delving into the ever-increasing mystery of the TVA and how it relates to He Who Remains, and possibly even to Renslayer's role in it as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that honestly barely covers what's going on just in this first show. It is packed full. There is great mystery, and it was before I go into my thoughts, I'm curious, what did you think of the season 2 premiere?
I really liked it, and I went back through season 1. It's been like 2 years, so I went back and rewatched all of season 1.
Me too.
And so it was a lot of fun, and it was fun to revisit that. And I thought this carried over so nicely. One thing I think is really great about Loki is we kind of get we get cliffhangers at the end of every episode, and so. You know, it's very binge-worthy TV, and just the right amount of time, about 40 minutes or so. I think season 2 kicked off with a bang. I agree. OB was a highlight, and I mean, Ke Huy Quan is just an incredible actor, as we've seen. He had an incredible year.
Oscar winner already.
Yes. So great. I love season 2. It's continuing the Loki magic. I liked it. What'd you think?
I thought it was absolutely incredible. Matter of fact, it might be my favorite hour of Marvel television ever.
Whoa,
and that's saying a lot because there have been several that I've really thought were incredible. This one, I can almost not find a fault in it. The cinematography was just unbelievable at moments. It always felt like an epic movie. It always did. The soundtrack, I can't remember the lady's name who did the soundtrack, was fearless and spotless and beautiful and soft at the right moments and epic at the right moments. The acting was incredible. The story that they're telling, the number of, I loved this so much. It worries me a little bit. I feel like I'm set up to not like any of the rest of them because this hour of television was so good. It was just so incredibly good. And there's so much, like, my head can't stop thinking about the show, this episode in particular, and the implications of so many parts of it, and trying to figure out who's doing what. And we're going to get into some of that. My first thought, so the thing I talked about, the timey-wimey Marvel elements time thing, they call it time slipping. I'm curious, why do you think Loki is time slipping? And in answering that, keeping in mind and maybe even talking a little bit about why other people's aren't time slipping. So Ouroboros, or OB, to make it a lot easier to refer to him, OB thinks that it has to do with the time, the temporal loom being overburdened and it happening, but it's only happening to Loki. So I don't think that explanation works. And solving Loki's time slipping problem is based on that's why it's happening. So I don't think we actually solved the problem, even though the end of the episode kind of makes you feel like maybe we have. I don't think we have at all. I think that's not why it's happening. So I'm curious, why do you think it's happening, and why isn't it happening to other people? Who or what caused it?
Yeah, I agree that I don't think it's fixed, and I think it's something that we're going to see. And I think that's a way that they're going to be able to keep this kind of interesting. And I think one of the things that was really powerful about the first season is that every time that you thought you understood what was going on, things kind of changed, and that was the fun of the first season of Loki. And I think we're going to be able to see that played out even more with this time slipping throughout the season, as we see kind of playing with time even more, and interacting with characters at different points. As far as why, obviously we don't have an explanation yet, but I think it has something to do with the way that he was kicked back by a version of himself at the end of time as he was there with He Who Remains. So I think it had something to do with the way that he was kicked back, but we'll see. What do you think? What do you think it is?
I'm kind of with you. We'll see. I'm not sure. I lean a little bit more towards He Who Remains needed him to time slip, like, and his little thing that he wore on his wrist that he could affect time and all this kind of stuff, that maybe he created this on purpose, that there was something he needed to happen that required Loki jumping around in time to happen. But let's go back to the Loki. What it has done is it's making him go back and forth on the same timeline, not on a variant timeline, not on a branch. He's going back and forth in the same one. So I'm curious, what did you think about that? Because this is very different from time and how time works in the Marvel universe. Somehow in the TVA, it's working differently, and Loki is able to jump back and forth. And in a very interesting way, he's able to sort of cause causal time loops in that he can go back in time, and while he's in the past, immediately impact the future the way he did with OB and Mobius. What did you think about that? And was it surprising, or did you like it? What were your thoughts?
So I was thinking about that as it was happening, and I thought it had to do with the fact that the TVA kind of only exists in this one time stream, kind of parallel to the sacred timeline, I suppose.
Right.
But I think one thing that would be interesting to see over the course of the season maybe is for him to leave the TVA and then to end up in different timelines based on the time slipping. So that maybe if he left the TVA, he wasn't going, back to the same timeline and forward to the same timeline. That we would see kind of him jump timelines based on what he did in the past. I think that might be something that would be interesting to see. What'd you make of it all?
I found it really interesting. I think it's probably more important than the first episode, like, spelled out. Although I think there's a lot of hints of how important it is. The name of the first episode was Ouroboros. Well, that is the name of the new character that we all seem to like, and I think he's an interesting character, and there's probably a lot to be unlocked about him, and we'll probably get into that at some point. If you consider that his name's Ouroboros, which is the snake that consumes itself in a perfect circle, then you have Mobius, who's interested, which is named after a Mobius strip, which is a twisted circle that doubles back on itself, and then Loki is actually derived from a word from I can't remember the original language, but it actually means circle. And so I feel like that this circling, this sort of causal time loop that they're allowing to happen within the Marvel world where time doesn't work that way, I think it's going to have a really important key role in how it all plays out and what is actually going on there in relationship with so many pieces of Miss Minutes, with OB, with He Who Remains, or whoever replaces him, Victor Timely, who we're going to see soon. Like, I think it's all related in some way, and that this circle idea of how the time works is going to get even more important and involved and confusing, I think, for a while before it all plays out. So I got one more that I didn't want us to get to at least during this. So I think that, what was your favorite moment? What was your favorite moment in this episode?
I love the moment where I mean, it's also
There's a lot.
It is, and I should say I love tonally how it's tense and humorous, And I think just organically, that's something that Marvel just does really well across its best shows and movies. But I liked it when whenever Mobius was going out to shoot the thing into the time stream to get Loki, and Loki was running towards trying to find the stick to kind of
to be able to
stick. To be able to go
erase himself.
Erase himself, right? And he runs into Sylvie right at that moment, and then he gets stuck with the stick. That was my favorite moment as he comes barreling back. I thought that was a fun moment to watch. It was very suspenseful. Did you have a favorite moment?
I really loved that one. And I think there's a lot to unpack, even with what happened there with the phone ringing and someone else like hit him with the stick to erase him. I actually, in thinking back over it, I think the most interesting moment was one that didn't didn't strike me as strongly as some other ones did. But now
Mhm.
looking back, I think it might be the most important moment. And that's the one when Loki in the past is in the war room and he sees an audio tape player, and he
Yeah.
starts it, and it turns out that it's Renslayer and He Who Remains talking.
Right. Mhm.
And He Who Remains tells Renslayer, "You're a marvel," which I think that choice of words is very interesting with the Marvels
Yeah.
movie coming out. "You're a marvel," and he says he only won the war because of her help, and that he'll be glad to lead with her. She's noticeably, obviously absent because of what happened last season. But here's the interesting thing for me, and I'm curious what you think of it. And I got two questions based on it. That tape was paused right at the point that He Who Remains, after he said all of that, names Renslayer. Who do you think was listening to that, and why? And why was it paused right at that point and not at some other point?
Yeah, I think that I don't know who was listening to it, but I think that whoever it was that discovered that was the cause for somehow resetting the timeline at the TVA, because he's very prominent at that point, right? And then for some reason invents the space lizards, the time wizards, and resets the time, right? I think it has to do with somebody discovering that his relationship with Renslayer. What do you think? Who do you think was listening?
I actually think it was Renslayer, and that it was one of the versions of Renslayer that had her memories washed, and that she's listening to this tape. She's hearing him talk about someone, and like, who is this person that's so important? And then hears her own name, and boom, stops it and realizes, I've got to get out of here right now before anyone figures out that I'm listening to this. And that she goes and starts something, I don't know quite what yet, but maybe that's part of what caused the full reset, that she's figured it out and he doesn't have any choice. I'm not particularly sure, but him saying that he couldn't have won the war without her makes me go, so what is it that's so important about her? And it makes me wonder if, so part of why he won the war, and he says this very clearly in the first season, is that Lyeth, the smoke monster, kind of prevents the other Kangs from messing with him. I'm beginning to wonder if she has some kind of control over Lyeth, and that becomes a very important, like, someone had to control Lyeth, and I don't feel like it was him. I feel like maybe, I don't know.
Sure.
We could continue to geek out. I've got 5 or 6 more questions that I was.
Yes, I know. There's a lot to unpack and a lot unknown still.
Absolutely. But we really do. Like I said, we love geeking out. It's a lot of fun for us. But we also, most of our geeking out is to kind of get people into what's going on so that we can move on and talk about theological and political impacts and even psychological, sociological kind of things. So we're going to go ahead and stop here, take a quick drop, and come back on the other side with our Theopolitico segment.
Welcome back to the Moonshine Jesus Show. We are moving into our Theopolitico segment, where we dive into the theology and politics of the shows that we are talking about. And today we are, of course, talking about Loki. So I've got questions that tend to lean more theological today, Mark.
All right.
I have one social question that I want to start off with, and it has to do with our new favorite character, OB, or the actor that plays him more so.
Yeah.
Ke Kwan, who, as we've said, has had an incredible year, just won an Oscar. But I was reading about him this morning. An article popped up on my social media feed, and it was saying that in 2001, he couldn't get a job at all. He didn't have a single job before Everything Everywhere All at Once. And
Mhm.
so he wasn't able to keep his health insurance because he couldn't get a single job. So, Mark, I was hoping that you might be able to put that in the context of the strike that has been going on with writers and actors and all of this. What does that say about the industry and how certain
Yeah,
people
well, I mean, it can be specifically about obviously the Hollywood industry, but it's really about all industry. It's about big corporate conglomerations. It's about unregulated, unregulated economies, unregulated capitalism, and how. I mean, the UWA strike is just yet another example. We've got one. Social media has been showing it over and over again that I think she is the CEO of Ford. She makes $111,000 a day, 400 times more than her average employee. Like that's just obscene. It's absurd. It's gross, and it's everything that's wrong. It even stands against who we at one point claimed we were as a nation, and more importantly, it for those of us who care about other people, whether you do it because you're a Christian, because you are a humanist, because of whatever, this is the exact reason why the world is falling apart, because we have made money God. It's not a surprise that we print in America, in God we trust on our money, because our money is our God, and that's the only thing we do trust. And it has caused the downfall of our nation, and it's going to continue to until we all do something about it. When a person who is as capable as him isn't able to get a reasonable job at reasonable pay and be able to have health care, because we don't get universal health care because it makes too much money for people with. I'm going to breathe deeply here and step off of my soapbox and turn it back to you and say, hey, what do you think about it as well? Because I might go on for another 20 minutes. This is a sore spot.
Well, I mean, amen, right? Yes, I mean, we should all be entitled to universal health care. We shouldn't see that as a privilege. We should see that as a universal right. And the fact that we don't just reinforces exactly what you were speaking of, that we've made money our God, and that we care more about money than people, because people should not be going bankrupt for receiving basic medical care. We shouldn't have situations where people can't get insurance, they're not eligible for insurance, or insurance companies find ways to kick them out or not to cover things, and people then can't provide for themselves. It's not fair. In terms of this specific instance, I think this also says something about the whitewashing of Hollywood, because we've got here an actor who's been acting since he was a child, right?
Wow. And he was incredible. He was incredible as a child.
Yes, a very talented actor, right? And I mean, not in some obscure movie or something like that.
He was in a mega hit. Film. Right? He was in a mega hit, and he was incredible in it. Like,
yes, a fan favorite, even for kind of a bad movie. I mean, a box office. Yeah,
it was.
In Temple of Doom, an Indiana Jones movie, but the weakest of the original trilogy. But everyone loved.
He was a standout in the movie.
He was a standout. He was. And so I think this has to do with the ways that we see whitewashing in Hollywood, but the way we see it across all industries, where we see people of color and other minorities who continue to be pushed aside. So there are a whole host of other things that we could say about that, especially on today, Indigenous Peoples Day, as we see, Indigenous peoples who are robbed of rights as well. But I also want to talk about some of the theological aspects, Mark, of Loki, because I do think this show, it's a Marvel show, and it is also theologically very rich. And so I'm thinking particularly about in this episode where Mobius is debating whether to tell the TVA agents about the TVA's true purpose, about what he has actually learned to be true about the TVA. And Mobius says, as he's debating that, yeah, let's ask them to turn their back on everything that they've ever believed in with a little bit of new information. And so I'm wondering, Mark, can you apply that in any way to our Christian beliefs?
Yeah, I think that's great, and that line hit me as well. And yeah, of course, we do live, particularly in the U.S., we live in a society where the answer to that question for most Christians is no. Don't tell them. Let them continue to believe the things they want to believe and live in their little bubble of falsehood and false realities that make them feel safe and happy. And there is some, I get why a person wants to live in that protected little bubble where you can feel safe and you can feel like there's some control in this sort of crazy world where anything can happen. I get why you might want that, but I kind of go with, and I can't remember who the quote is from, but with the idea that if facts can destroy the truth, it should. That is because otherwise we're living in a falsehood and we'll never be able to actually have outcomes that are good and that what we would like to see. If we're working off of a false premise, a false base, you'll never ever be able to understand how it all works in a way that you can create better outcomes. So I get, like, there was a lot going on inside of me when he said that line. I was like, oh yeah, man, that is a tough one. Like, do I destroy people's reality that makes them feel safe and protected? Or do I push them down a difficult road that will lead to a better life? That is a difficult question, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I think I would say that as Christians, what we do is we carefully help people deconstruct and reconstruct their faith. I don't think we just drop a truth bomb at people and be like, well, best of luck to you. I hope you can figure this out. I mean, like,
sometimes I do. I'm not as nice as people think I am, because sometimes I just go, you know what? I'm just going to say it.
But I know you, Mark, and you also help people. You also help people make sense of it. And so I think that we understand that people bring a lot of embedded theology, a lot of inherited theology, and we help them deconstruct that. But I don't think that we allow people to hold on to things that just are not factually true. And so I think one of the greatest sins that the church commits today is the fact that, most clergy go to seminary and they learn about like how the Bible was put together. And then it's like they forget all of that when they go work in churches, and they just like preach as if they had never learned any of that. And I think that's a great sin, because the people in the church deserve to know that. And that's part of our role as clergy, is to say, hey, look, we've learned this, and this has to affect our faith because we know it is factual. I mean, like, it's not something that's debated. Like, conservatives agree on it. Liberals agree on it. We know how the Bible was composed, and we have an obligation to let that inform our faith. Absolutely. So I think that it's harmful.
And I'll add one more point to what we're talking about is while we do want to help people deconstruct and we want to coach them through in a safe way as possible, we also that's not the speed at which that happens varies based on, in my opinion, one thing. And how much their current beliefs are hurting other people. I'm not willing to slow walk you through your false theological perspective if it's hurting other people. I'm not going to walk you through that slowly. I'm going to insist that it change quickly and do my best to try to help you through that. And honestly, I'm sorry if it causes you a little pain, but the amount of hurt that you're causing in the world is outweighed by that. Yeah, I just felt like
that's a wonderful point, and I think back to Bishop Spong, who we at ProgressiveChristianity.org had a very close relationship with. Who in one of his last books said, "I'm not going to have the debate anymore about whether or not LGBT lives are valid. That's not a debate I'm going to have because my faith speaks on this, and my faith says that all human life is sacred, and I'm not going to have this debate." And I think you're absolutely right, Mark, that whenever people are using theology in a way to hurt other people, then you have to tear that down right away. Absolutely. So I want to go to a line that was so important to us that it inspired the theme of our drinks. You know,
Great. We both. This is one of the rare times when our drinks matched up a little bit. It almost never happens. So there must be something going on. There must be something.
That's
going
right.
on.
That's
the
right.
timeline is conspiring to get us to go here.
That's right. What's going on is we both like bourbon, and we wanted to
drink
it today. but Loki, you know, it says that he is burdened with glorious purpose. And you know, sometimes that's kind of used ironically, and sometimes there's a hint that maybe he does have a glorious purpose. But I wondered if we could apply this theologically, Mark. What is our glorious purpose supposed to be as followers of Jesus?
A glorious purpose is pretty simple, and we you and I both talk about this a lot on the show, in our personal lives, in the ministry that we do. Our glorious purpose is to love other people. It is pretty dang simple. In terms of understanding what it is, it's simple.
Yeah.
Actuating that is much more difficult in the world that we're in, with all the systems and all of the things that are going on, and having to deconstruct and recognize what's hurting people and what does loving a person look like when there are systems stacked against them. That becomes a lot more difficult, and trying to figure out how to navigate that. So it's a difficult execution of a very simple answer. The answer is our purpose, our divine, and it is a glorious purpose. Love people, all people, in every way, in any way you can. But it does require a lot of work, and it can be difficult and painful. I mean, I've oversimplified it, but that's what I would say.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's as easy as that and as hard as that, right? Just love your neighbor. And how do you do that? Well, it's complicated, and it depends on the situation and who you are. And I think that, you know, what our kind of glorious purpose to love as kind of straight, white, cisgender, male Christians is to look at the structures and allow ourselves to be educated enough to see how it is that we see how those structures are enforcing systems of oppression. Say the criminal justice system, and the way that it disproportionately affects young Black men, and it shuffles them into what Michelle Alexander calls the new Jim Crow. You know, I think that our glorious purpose is to recognize both internal systems of oppression within ourselves and the systems of oppression in our society, and to be willing to speak out against those things. So I have like 1,000 more theological questions that were raised by this one episode alone.
As a Presbyterian, I have to say, the fact that you didn't even talk about predestination, I'm so glad you didn't get to that question, that I didn't have to deal with it again.
Okay, Mark. So I'm going to make a confession. I made it my goal to not ask you a single predestination question.
Thank you.
I said as soon as we decided that we were going to talk about Loki, I said my goal is that I'm going to talk almost exclusively about theology, and I'm not going to mention Presbyterianism and predestination.
I didn't want to have to pull out my Calvin and quote the second volume and how little we really. Thank you for that.
As much as we would all like to hear you try to make Calvin not a predestination kind of guy.
He's not really.
We just won't have to go there today, unless that's one of our make me look stupid questions, which is our next segment. I want to talk about theology more, but we got to get to this next segment. We got to try to make each other look stupid. So, hey, let's take a quick break, and let's come back for Make Me Look Stupid.
Hello, and welcome back to the Moonshine Jesus Show. You're joining us for what we at least like to say is our favorite segment, and a lot of times it actually really is our Make Me Look Stupid segment, because we get so much joy out of trying to stump our co-hosts. And sometimes we actually are already stumped ourselves, and we just want our co-host to try to explain what in the hell is going on so that we have a better understanding. So, I haven't done this in a while. I am going to be the benevolent host of this segment, and you have not had the opportunity somehow to steal a question away from me today, which you almost always
so disappointing.
do. And I know, but because it's such an important element of this show, I am going to let you go first, so you still have an opportunity to steal one of my questions. So the onus is on you, sir.
Okay, I've got a ton of questions that I want to ask you, but I'm going to narrow it down to one, because this is the one I think I'm the most interested in, because he who remains has played such an important role in this in the TVA and in Loki, and Kang and his various iterations are supposed to play a huge role in this next phase of Marvel, which. Let's be honest, is floundering a little bit. I think compared to
that's fair.
That's
fair.
So
I think Loki's trying to pull it back together, give it some purpose and focus, and it might not. We'll see.
We'll see. And Loki, I think, is one of the very much the strongest TV entry and one of the stronger entries into the MCU altogether. But Kang the Conqueror is played by a real-life human named Jonathan Majors, who has had a number of issues in his personal life that make him perhaps not a great choice to be a villain in the films. If he's a real-life villain, do we want a real-life villain to play one on TV? Let me ask you this, Mark. What do you think Jonathan Majors is going to contribute? What do you think Kang's role is going to be? Is that going to be affected by the real life?
I'm going to deal with both the real life and the story life of this. Stuff is starting to come out through his defense that is actually available online already, that makes it very clear that what he's being accused of is almost impossibly likely. It's almost no chance that it is. I'm stumbling on those words. There is very little chance that what he's being accused of is actually what happened. There's videos that show a person who says they're injured doing stuff that a person without injury wouldn't be able to do. There's videos of him interacting with a person who he wouldn't be interacting with that way, but if they were really in a difficult relationship. So I think ultimately he's going to be found not guilty. Matter of fact, I'm not even sure it's going to go to trial with the evidence that they have right now. I'm not making a judgment whether he might be a good person or a bad person. I just think in the one case that has caused the questions, it does look like this is a false accusation.
Okay, and I've got a follow-up, Mark, to that. So this has been something that we've talked about pretty recently with Ezra Miller as well. And so I want to know, there's a lot of conversation about separating artists from their art. What is our obligation as Christians in kind of delineating that and separating artists and their art?
For me, there and this is a tricky question. For instance, there's several things about Mother Teresa that are problematic for me. Very, very problematic. Some of the things she said about the poor and why God put the poor on the planet. And however, me supporting what she has done and quoting some of the incredibly insightful things she said does not add to her ability, even though she's passed away, to continue to do the things that are negative. And that's where I think we have to start. So, for instance, man, I love me a Chick-fil-A sandwich. God, I love me a Chick-fil-A sandwich. I have not had one in 4 or 5 years because I am not going to contribute directly in a way that will cause the folks that are hurting people, particularly the LGBTQ community. I'm not going to contribute in a way that will allow them to do that more. So I think as Christians, our responsibility is to say, in what way am I supporting the person that's causing harm to others? if it turns out, let's say that Majors is found guilty, I really hope that you and I just choose to never cover another thing that he's in, because I don't want to add any money that could become residuals for him. I don't. In this case, I'm happy to say I don't think that's going to be the case. But as much as we can, I think that that's really important that we move towards that way, because, like it or not, money is voice in America. You vote with your money. You don't have to like that. You can wish it weren't true, but that's a reality. So it's very important that we deeply consider where we put our dollars. Let's go back to He Who Remains and Major and the show. I think he's going to play an incredibly important role. I think that we're about to see an unbelievable relationship between He Who Remains, Kang the Conqueror, and Victor Timely. I think it's going to get really interesting. As a matter of fact, I sort of think that Kang the Conqueror that we saw in the last Ant-Man movie, and he got sucked into his improbable time, whatever it was called. I think he's going to get spit back out in the early 19th century, and that's how we're going to end up with Victor Timely, and they're going to need him to come back to help the TVA. I think it's going to be a very intricate relationship, and that in the movies we're going to see lots of the versions of him that we saw in that mid-credit break. I think in Ant-Man was where we saw that. So I think he's going to end up being really, really important. What's your answer to that question? I know I've really gone on a lot on that.
Yes, I think that the versions of Kang that we see in Loki have to play out. They've set it up in such a way that he is intimately intertwined to the story, and he has to be a part of that. And I think that we already know that he's supposed to be the new big bad of this next phase of Marvel, and so. I hope that Jonathan Majors is found innocent and that he can continue to play, because I think recasting at this point would be very difficult. In terms of like what our responsibility is for separating the artist from the art that they create, I think that that's really challenging. I think that it's also really challenging as individuals to be purists when we have relatively little influence. So I agree that we vote with our money, but in a lot of ways, the way our system is set up, it's set up where these major corporations have to be the ethical voice for us. That at the end of the day, if you or I go to see a Marvel movie, it matters relatively less unless we can get a whole movement of people to do that. And we have to depend on these major studios to do what might be the ethical thing. So it's a real challenge. I think it's something that we continually navigate. But yes, I think we're going to continue to see him, and I think we're going to continue to see the variants of Kang throughout both Loki and the MCU. So I didn't steal your question, Mark. Did I?
You did not.
You got one for me.
I do. So one of the most interesting characters from the first season was Miss Minutes.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
This episode, we don't even see Miss Minutes. No. She was missing mostly. I mean, there were bumper stickers. There was actually a little air freshener hanging off of the back of the
mail delivery truck.
The mail delivery truck. What role do you think she plays in all of this? Like, what's her purpose? How important is that character who's almost completely missing from this episode?
Yeah, so I think she's sentient, and I think she's a co-conspirator with He Who Remains, this variant of Kang. And so the reference we get to her in this episode is that Mobius is trying to ask Miss Minutes questions because he's dependent upon her. And at first, he doesn't get an answer. And then the second time he goes to do it,
he literally says, I think she's offline.
Yes, I think she's offline, and then Loki says you can't trust her. Don't ask her any questions. So I think she's sentient, and I think she's a part of it all. She's a co-conspirator with He Who Remains. What do you think?
I actually think it's related. I kind of agree with you. I think there's a chance that she might be more important than Kang. But I also think that they might have started skewing the storyline that way as Major's issues started coming up. So they would have a way to bring up another big bad. I think it is interesting that in last season she tells Renslayer, who's asking for information, and we're hearing now Renslayer like seems to have a really close relationship with Who Remains, and was very important in a lot of conquering and killing, stopping all of the other Kangs. But as important as she is, Miss Minutes told her, I can't give you that information. It's classified. So Miss Minutes has access to it. But even Renslayer, who is with He Who Remains, isn't allowed to have that information. I found that to be pretty curious in terms of what that might be. So I think she is connected to Kang in some way. The fact that He Who Remains was eliminated and all of a sudden Miss Minutes isn't around.
Yeah.
I think that's a very interesting that that's when that happened. But I'm going to add another piece. I think I don't have any answers. I have curiosities.
Okay.
I really think Ouroboros, he sort of replaced Miss Minutes in this episode. Miss Minutes sort of narrates things that we don't understand. In this episode, Ouroboros was narrating things we don't understand. He had that bright, fun personality that Miss Minutes has. I don't know. And Ouroboros, think about this. He's the only one who doesn't have his memories erased. He remembers all the way back to the beginning. He wrote the manual, the user's manual that everyone gets. And his memories are never erased. Even as Mobius is not remembering things because his memory was erased.
Right. Yes.
Or OB has his memories, just like Miss Minutes does. I think there's going to be some kind of very interesting connection between OB, Miss Minutes, and Kang. I don't know exactly what it is yet, but I think so.
I can't wait to see. We're talking about this at the very beginning of the season, so we can come back and visit it, right?
We'll need to come back and visit at the end of the season. And speaking of coming back and visiting at the end of the season, we need a show. We need to decide what we're going to do next week. And there is a show out there that has wrapped up that we did talk about when it was first starting. Do you have any? You got a clue what I might be talking about?
Are you talking about Ahsoka?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. You want to go back and visit that?
If you're on board, I think we should come back now that the season is finished and revisit it because it got really interesting.
Yeah, it's a great show. I can't wait to talk about it. There's a lot there. And we had a lot of fun the first go round. So I think, let's go. Let's go for it. Ahsoka, back to Star Wars.
Absolutely. So you heard it here. Make sure that you catch up on your Ahsoka so that you can join us for the next episode. We'll close saying to all of you, thank you. We appreciate you tuning in. We appreciate you downloading the show. We get to do this show because you show up and at least entertain the idea that we are somewhat interesting to listen to from time to time. We appreciate it, whether it's true or not. We do. We genuinely do. So thank you all so much. We appreciate you being here, and we will catch you the next time on the Moonshine Jesus Show.
Moonshine Jesus, nobody scared. Moonshine